All right, welcome back for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is uh, in this session here, we will be covering chapters 11 through 16. So the last time around, we began. Victor had, well, actually, the creature had just confronted Victor, and Victor went to destroy the creature, and the creature said, "Hear me out, listen to my story." And so that's where we left off, and now we're going to listen to the creature's story, telling Victor what's been happening since Victor abandoned him in his lab. So, chapter 11, Creature Stories begins. He says, "It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of my being. All events of that period appear confused and indistinct." So the creature is almost like a baby, kind of in a way, waking up. He doesn't know what's going on around him. He doesn't know where he's at. He really needed somebody in his life at this point in time, and Victor, took off. So he's left to kind of figure things out on his own. Anyways, the creature goes on the beginning of his story to talk about how he's, looking around, kind of trying to figure out things. He notices the changing of night and day with the passing of the moon and the sun. He says that he was oppressed by cold at one point, found a fire, and this was interesting. He says, "In my joy, I thrust my hand into the live embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce such opposite effects." So, how can something essentially, he's looking at fire. He says, "How could something that warms me and makes me feel joy also cause pain?" Um, I find this experience of the creature relatable because when I was a young child myself, when I was a little kid, okay, it's one of my first memories. It's like burned into my mind. I stuck my hand in a wood burning stove. So it was a very similar reaction to the creature here. My father had told me not to touch it, and I distinctly remember looking into the flames and thinking how pretty they were and wanting to touch them, and stuck my hand in there, and I burned my hand pretty bad. And I remember my dad picking me up and rushing me to the bathroom to run, well, I think it was the kitchen, to run cold water over my hand and then put ice on it. Fortunately, I don't have like any long lasting burns from it, but yeah, this was a totally relatable experience for myself. The creature goes around looking for food. He's basically eating like whatever he can come across, which mainly consists of like nuts, acorns, this type of thing. He does find a village of people at one point, and he goes into the village, and what ends up happening is that the whole village comes out and attacks him. He says that he was grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons. I escaped to the open country and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel. And this is where he's going to be at for a while, actually, for quite a large portion of this book, where he comes across a family that's living in this like cottage, and this hovel is like attached to it, but he can like see what's going on kind of like through the planks in the wall. And he's laying like on a straw bed, and he's observing these people. Okay, he's observing this family that's living together, and he finds out the names of these people through observation. He says, "I learned." Let's see. What does he say? "There was indeed a godlike science." He's talking about their speech, about the communication that this family's talking to each other. He's observing and listening, and through observation, through the gathering of empirical data, right? He's able to figure out the name of simple objects: fire, milk, bread, wood. He also learned the names of the cottagers themselves, which are Felix, Agatha, and those are the brother and sister that live there. He does end up finding out that the family, let's see, is this it? I think there's a part where he helps them gather It might not be here. It might be the firewood. I believe that he helps them gather firewood in this section. Yes, he does, because they refer to him as the good spirit and wonderful. So what happens is that the creature sees that they are having troubles with their chores, and so he does their chores for them while the family's sleeping, and they're elated. They're very happy, and this happiness is evident on their faces, and it makes the creature feel good that he did good for this family. So right now we have like the creature is he's not malevolent, he's not evil, okay? He says, when I slept or when I was absent, the forms of the venerable blind father, the gentle Agatha, and the excellent Felix flitted before me. I looked upon them as superior beings who would be the arbiters of my future destiny. So he's already planning in his mind how this family, he wants to be a part of humanity, and he sees this family as his ticket to, not being alone anymore, of being a part of the human race. Chapter 13, we have an introduction of this Arabian girl named Safi, who is, I guess, betrothed. She's betrothed to Felix. We find out a little bit about this, but they begin to teach her because she doesn't speak English. And there's a whole backstory for her, which is interesting. It's kind of a commentary on women's place in the world in the 19th century. So Mary Shelley is using the creature to comment on social issues. And this would continue in a lot of science fiction. Specifically, I think of monsters or alien characters commenting on humanity in, for instance, like Star Trek. Like Mr. Spock is our alien character that comments on humanity and the human species and civilization, and this would continue in each iteration of the series. For instance, the Star Trek Next Generation, this role would be taken by Lieutenant Commander Data, who's an android. Deep Space Nine, it was Odo, and so on and so forth. So using science fiction to comment on social issues is something that Mary Shelley did way back when. There's a lot of wind today. We'll see how this turns out. The creature says, I obtained a cursory knowledge of history and a view of several empires at present existing in the world that gave me insight into the manners, governments, and religions of different nations of the earth. I heard of the slothful Asiatics, of the stupendous genius and mental activity of the Grecians, of wars and wonderful virtue of the early Romans, of their subsequent degenerating, of the decline of that mighty empire, of chivalry, Christianity, and kings. I heard of the discovery of the American hemisphere and wept with Safi over the hapless fate of its original inhabitants. He says, these wonderful narrations inspired me with strange feelings. Was man, indeed, at once so powerful, so virtuous, and magnificent, yet so vicious and base? So he's seen, just like the fire produced both joy and pain, that humanity itself is able to perform both acts of virtue and acts of, baseness, moral degradation, destruction. So he's observing this. He says, I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments. But when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased, and I turned away with disgust and loathing. So the creature seems to be a political anarchist. He doesn't see the need for laws and governments. So this may be a commentary by Mary Shelley on her father's views, okay? And then he says here, I heard of the division of property, of immense wealth and squalid poverty, of rank descent and noble blood. These words induced me to turn towards myself. I learned that possessions most esteemed by your fellow creatures were high and unsullied descent united with riches. A man might be respected with only one of these advantages, but without either he was considered, except in very rare instances, as a vagabond and a slave. doomed to waste his powers for the profits of a chosen few. And what was I? Of my creation and creator, I was absolutely ignorant. But I knew that I possessed no money, no friends, no kind of property. I was besides endued with a figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even of the same nature as man. Now, so he's observing through the education of Safi all these various things concerning society and saying to himself, I'm not even of the same nature of man. He's asking questions now about himself. Was I then a monster, a blot upon the earth from which all men fled and whom all men disowned? He then says further on, I learned that there was but one means to overcome the sensation of pain, and that was death, a state which I feared yet did not understand. I admired virtue and good feelings and loved the gentle manners and amiable qualities of my cottagers, but I was shut out from intercourse with them, except through means which I obtained by stealth when I was unseen and unknown, and which rather increased than satisfied the desire I had of becoming one among my fellows. So he sees himself as an outcast of society. He wants to be a part of society, and he can't. And based on some of these statements here, it seems that the creature, at this point anyways, may be an atheist. Okay, because when he says, I learned there was one means to overcome the sensation of pain, and that was death, right? He's talking on this. So we already saw earlier when Victor's mother got sick and died that she commended her life into the hands of God, as did Justine. Justine also commended her soul into the hands of God. So we had two creatures that were believers in an afterlife, and then the creature here seems to believe that death is the end of it all. So that's just something that I found interesting. We get some more background on Safi in chapter 14. It says, sometime elapsed before I learned the history of my friends. I'm not going to go into all of this, but we learned that the old man's name was de Lacy and that he was in France, that he met a Turkish merchant there whose daughter, let's see. Yeah, she finds out that Safi's father was a Turkish merchant, okay? And that this merchant was accused in Paris, and, quote, it was judged that his religion and wealth, rather than the crime alleged against him, had been the cause of his condemnation. All right, so he was basically set up. But Felix, the brother of that lives in this house, this girl's Safi is betrothed to him. And we get a whole background on it. Safi relates that her mother was a Christian Arab, and that Safi herself was instructed in the tenets of the religion, which most likely would have been Orthodox Christianity, probably Antiochian, although it is possible that she's Coptic, but I'm guessing since this is Turkey, it's probably Eastern Orthodoxy. Says that she instructed her daughter in the tenets of her religion and taught her to aspire to higher powers of intellect and independence of spirit, forbidden to female followers of Muhammad. So under Islam, women are just completely devoid of, at least according to the novel at this time, they're forbidden to have independence and knowledge. Let's see. The family had moved to an asylum in a cottage in Germany where the creature discovered them. And find out that Safi here has fled to join the family, to join Felix, because she says, the creature says, a residence in Turkey was abhorrent to her. Her religion and her feelings were alike averse to it. So she doesn't really see much prospect and hope for herself if she remains in Turkey. So she fled to find the family so that she can marry Felix and have at least a better life than she would have had where she was at. Under the laws of, because what happened was after the Crusades, Islam basically took over these portions of the Middle East that were formerly Christian, places like Constantinople, which is in Turkey. It's under the rule of the Islamic Caliphate, or at that time it would have been the Ottoman Empire. All right, chapter 15. The creature at this point finds a couple books. I found on the ground a leather, several articles of dress, some books. I eagerly seized the prize and returned with it to my hovel. Fortunately, the books were written in a language, the elements of which I had acquired at the cottage. They consisted of Paradise Lost, a volume of Plutarch's Life, and the Sorrows of Werther. From these books, the Sorrows of Werther, he says the disquisitions upon death and suicide were calculated to fill me with wonder. So he's reading about this book, which I guess was pretty popular at the time. I don't know what it's about, but it does seem to deal with the subject of death. And the creature says here that he wept. He wept over the hero of the novel's demise. He then says here that, a quote on his own persona, he says, my person was hideous and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. These are questions that we all deal with at a certain point in our life, so we are observing these questions now being asked of the creature. Who am I and why am I here? These are questions we all ask, questions concerning our existence. He says, I read of men concerned in public affairs. This was from Plutarch's Lives. Of governing or of massacring their species, and I felt the greatest ardor for virtue rise within me and abhorrence for vice. So again, the creature at this point is good nature, but he reads Paradise Lost by John Milton. He said, Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I read it, as I had read other volumes which had fallen into my hands, as a true history. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. He says, many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, right? He considered himself to be like Adam initially, but then says that he basically says, I have more in common with Satan, with Lucifer. There is no Eve for him. No Eve. Unlike Adam, he doesn't have an Eve. Because when God created Adam in the book of Genesis, he says it's not good for man to be alone, and then he creates a helper, a helpmeet for Adam. And then, he purposes in his heart he doesn't want to be alone anymore, so he tries to introduce himself to the blind old man. Of course, it goes well at first until Felix comes home and sees the creature and is horrified by his appearance and drives him off. And at this point, the creature is just devastated. All of his dreams concerning, becoming a member or a friend of the family are gone. He does come to his senses and comes back and says, well, maybe I'll go back and try again. But the whole family is gone, right? They're gone. They've left. They've fled the cottage. He says, there was none among the myriads of men that existed who would pity or assist me. And should I feel kindness towards my enemies? No. From that moment, I declared everlasting war against the species, and more than all, against him who had formed me and sent me forth to this unsupportable misery. So this is when he swears vengeance upon Victor Frankenstein. He's bitter and angry. He does try to save a girl from drowning at this point as he's fleeing. He's wandering the woods, and he sees this child who falls into the river. He saves her, and then he is shot by the approach of these people. Right? Let's see. When the man drew near and saw me, he aimed a gun, which he carried, at my body and fired. I sank to the ground, and my injurer, with increased swiftness, escaped into the woods. This was then the reward for my benevolence? I saved a human being from destruction, and as a recompense, I now writhed under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. The feelings of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. So, again, we go back to this question. Are we just subjects or creations of our environment? Okay? That's something to consider, because I think that's what Mary Shelley is getting at here. Is the creature just fated to be monstrous because of his interactions with humanity? The fact that he's suffered an injury and violence and, being a social outcast, is that ultimately he's just fated to be monstrous? Or can he choose? Despite all of this, is he still capable of choosing to do good and to be benevolent rather than malevolent? Something to think about. Okay? He finds Frankenstein's journal, finds out about his creation, knows who his creator is, and then vows to find Frankenstein and destroy him. He says he comes across a child. He goes looking for Frankenstein. He comes across a child. Of course, we're now finding out the events that have happened previously. This is Victor's little brother, all right, who the creature murders. He then plants the locket on the little picture that the child was carrying. Okay, he says to the child, Frankenstein, you belong then to my enemy, to him towards whom I have sworn eternal vengeance. You shall be my first victim. And he murders the child. So now, like Cain slays Abel, the creature has committed his first murder, right? He's a murderer. As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something glittering on his breast. I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. It's Victor Frankenstein's mother. So he takes this locket that the child's carrying and he plants it on Justine. He says, I entered a barn which had appeared to me to be empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. She was young, not indeed so beautiful as her whose portrait I held, but of an agreeable aspect and blooming in loveliness of youth and health. He plants it on her. He frames her for the murder of the child by planting the locket. And he knows what he's doing, because he's not dumb like he's depicted in a lot of the movies where he's just like a, kind of a walking zombie type thing. He's highly intelligent. And he says, thanks to the lessons of Felix and the sanguinary laws of man, I had learned now to work mischief. I bent over and placed the portrait securely in one of the folds of her dress. She moved again, and I fled. So he framed her, knowing well what he was doing. He then says to Victor, at the very ending of this, I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create. So having told Victor his story, he's now saying, Victor, you are my creator. The only way I'm ever going to be happy is if you create me an Eve, a creature that is as hideous in appearance as myself and made the same manner as you made me, because all of humankind will not associate with me. Now, when we get to the next part, okay, chapter 17, the creature is going to have finished his story, and we're going to get the conclusion of the tale. Will Victor go through with this and create, a companion for the creature or not? What are the implications of doing this? Are these things that he'll think about? What kind of conversations are we going to have concerning this? And what's going to happen concerning the creature and Victor? There's a lot of stuff left unresolved here. And next time we will finish the book. We will read chapter 17 through the conclusion. Thank you for watching. What are your thoughts on this section? Leave a comment below. All right. Have a wonderful day.